So if you got a Bible near you, open it up to the book of Ruth. Pull out message notes, eaglechurch.com/Sunday. You can follow the message notes there electronically. We've come to this space where Ruth's life has unfolded in a way where she has no idea what in the world is going on, can't figure it out. And here's the setting, Ruth chapter 1, verse 1, in the days when the judges ruled. So you see the book of Ruth is in the context of the book of Judges, spiritual Groundhog Day, same time frame. Here's the scene. There's a famine in the land, and a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech, his wife's name Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. So you've got a lot of names and some locations here to get straight. So here's a map of the area of Moab. So you've got a family, Elimelech and Naomi. They're from the country, the space called Moab, which is it's modern day Jordan. So it borders the eastern shores of the Dead Sea. And so the Moabites, the history on the Moabites is, basically the group of people came from incest and deception. And so it was Lot's oldest daughter who was so desperate to get pregnant, she waited till her dad got so intoxicated that she slept with him and became pregnant through his child. Yeah, there are some sections of the Bible that are not PG-13, all right? So this is one of those times, right? So the Moabites are not known as a people for morality. You with me? That's how they started. And so there was a lot of tension between the Moabites and the Israelites. You could imagine how the Israelites might have looked upon the Moabites, not as the best citizens of the land, so to speak. And so you've got a family, Elimelech and Naomi. They're from Moab, the Moabite scene, and then they have children, Mahlon and Chilion. Now, verse 3, now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one of them Orpah and the other Ruth. After they lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. And so you got the picture of the characters here. So you've got Elimelech and Naomi have 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion, who both marry, and then all of the men die. So Chilion dies, Mahlon dies, Elimelech dies, most likely through some kind of illness or disease. Something ran through the land, some type of plague of some sort is the best example of that. And then, so basically you've got leaving Naomi, Orpah, and Ruth as widows. So there's your scene, similar to what Austin ran into in a nightclub recently, where lest you think this is just, Book of Ruth chapter 1, this is everyday life for some, right? Where you just are in loss and subtraction and saying goodbye and death and grief, and it's just one after the other. And now verse 6, when she heard in Moab, this is Naomi hearing in Moab, that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them. Isn't that amazing? So the reputation of God around the surrounding area had reached all the way over to Moab. Bethlehem means house of food, because in that day when a famine struck the land, they didn't just have large storehouses to go. It was survival mode. It was just trying to make it to the next day. And there was a reputation that God had stepped in repeatedly for his people and provided for them. Naomi hears about this. A Moabite hears the Israelites, God of the Israelites seems to come through for his people. We should go there and see if we can find a way to continue to survive. So Naomi and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. So Orpah decides she doesn't want to go. She's returning. She's going to go back to Moab. Not a lot of details there. She says, I'm out. So basically now we just have Naomi and Ruth making the trek to Bethlehem. And they decide they're going to go. And here's verse 15. See the scene here where Naomi is trying to talk her out of it. Look, said Naomi, your sister-in-law, speaking about Orpah, is going back to her people and her gods. Notice little g. We'll get to that in a minute. Go back with her. But Ruth replied, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. That's the sentence that the book of Ruth is most known for. Ruth saying to Naomi, no, I'm going to stay with you. I am not tapping out. Your people will be my people, and your God, notice capital G, will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I'll be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates you and me. And so the god of the Moabites, here's the god. Chemosh is his name. He's known as the destroyer. That's what his name means. So really welcoming temple to visit, right? Hey, go to the destroyer's temple, Chemosh. And child sacrifice was just a regular part of their worship gatherings. So that's the backstory. So again, Moabites, their history, their gods and goddesses. It was a dark and desperate place. It was a place where you just want to flee if you got immersed in there. But for whatever reason, Orpah goes back and Ruth just says, no, Naomi, I'm sticking with you. We're going to make it to Bethlehem. So verse 18, when Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. Verse 19, so the two women went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them, and the women exclaimed, can this be Naomi? Catch this now. Don't call me Naomi, she told them. Call me Mara, because the Lord Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me. So Ruth chapter 1, the word for Ruth chapter 1 is emptying. The seasons of life where it's simply loss and subtraction and death and grief. It's the season where you look up and it's just famine and death and childless and widows, where it's illness, right? Loss of a loved one, infertility, you're jobless, you're spouseless, you're childless, you're homeless. Emptying. Ruth chapter 1. Here's when you know you're in an emptying season of life. When you feel like there's a residue of Mara settling around the lining of your soul. Mara, that kind of seeds of bitterness where you just don't know if you can take another wave of emptying. You feel like your cup is already drained dry and it continues to be drained. And you can't even get to the place where you're desperate enough to cry out about it. She just says, don't even call me Naomi anymore. Just call me Mara. That's when you know you're in emptying stages. And that's Ruth chapter 1. And that may be where this morning finds some of you. That you just on the receiving end of what you just wonder how much more can one take. And Ruth makes her way to Bethlehem. Childless, spouseless, pretty much homeless, fairly well directionless, and now she's thrust into now she's got to survive, right? Famine in the land, you just got to survive. You just got to make it to the next day. And some of you are in that season of life. You got so much going on, you're just trying to make it to the next day. Ruth chapter 1, emptying. And when you're in the emptying stage, you eventually give way to the next phase, which is chapter 2, which we call wondering. The wondering stage. Chapter 2 says, Naomi had a relative in her husband's side, the clan of Elimelech, a man of standing. His name was Boaz. So next key character in the book of Ruth is a man named Boaz. And Ruth, the Moabitess, said to Naomi, let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone whose eyes I find favor. Naomi said to her, go ahead, my daughter. So here's how that would work. In the fields, here's what the men would go through the fields with. It's like a sickle. Can you put that picture up? So that's what they would go through, and they would take the field. That's how they would harvest the crops. It's harvest season in Bethlehem. So the men would be going through with the sickle, and the women would come behind and bind the sheaves together. They would bind the stalks together, and naturally there would be some leftovers. And say, Ruth says, I know what I can do. It's harvest season. All this is going on in the fields. I'm just going to go and scour the field of Boaz and get the leftovers. It'd be equivalent of modern day dumpster diving, right? So that's their version of dumpster diving back in the day. It's basically taking the leftovers, taking anything just to survive, to make it to the next day. And she's going to Boaz's field, and Boaz takes notice of her. He notices that she's there and she's working hard and she's one who just is, surviving. He asks about her and says, who is this? And they say, well, she's just here day by day and collecting enough so that she can continue to the next day. And that's when you know you're in you've moved from emptying to wondering, when you're thrust into this large space of uncertainty where you have no idea how you got to where you are. You look at your life, you go, is this really my life? How did I get here? Why am I here? Where is this going? Is this as good as it's going to get? When you're in that space right there, you're in Ruth chapter 2, you're in the wondering phase. Emptying moves way to wondering. And when you hit that space, I think Ruth gives us a great example here. What do? You get up each day and you just do the next right thing you know to do. Don't make it any more complicated than that. Ruth's like, I got to survive. I got to have food for Naomi. She's caring for kind of an aging and slightly depressed mother-in-law in the midst of everything else, being childless, being spouseless, being homeless, and now she's caring for kind of an aging relative who's probably not doing great mentally and emotionally. She's struggling with Mara through and through her bones, so she's trying to care for that. She's like, I've just got to do that. Next thing I need, I just got to get food. And there's a reputation that Boaz would be a good field to go to. It's somehow connected to Naomi. I'm going to go to Boaz's field, and I'm just going to collect food. I'm going to do the next right thing I know to do. And what happens, that's what the Lord steps in, right? He just links up into that space. Verse 20, she goes home. She tells Naomi that she's in Boaz's field, and she's working and she's getting food, and Boaz is taking care of her. Verse 20 of chapter 2, the Lord bless him, Naomi said to her daughter-in-law. He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead, she added. That man is our close relative. He is one of our, underline this in your Bibles, our kinsman redeemers. Then Ruth the Moabite said, he even said to me, stay with my workers until they finish harvesting all my grain. Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, it would be good for you, my daughter, to go with the girls, because in someone else's field you might be harmed. You know, that if you were a young gal from the Moabite territory in an Israelite field by yourself, you could see it was right, you're exposed. It was not a very safe place to be. Verse 23, so Ruth stayed close to the servant girls of Boaz to glean until the barley and wheat harvests were finished, and she lived with her mother-in-law. So Naomi sees a ray of light coming into her emptying season through this kinsman redeemer. She says, Boaz is a kinsman redeemer. And I put in your notes what that means. So the backstory on this phrase is the oldest living relative to the widow becomes the kinsman redeemer. The male relative to Ruth, who's the oldest living since she had lost her husband, Mahlon, she's now widowless, she's childless, so the kinsman redeemer would become her husband and would produce children through her, would help provide for her needs physically, would help handle her business transaction. That's what the kinsman redeemer did. And Naomi says, oh my goodness, Boaz can be your kinsman redeemer. He's related to you. This is, again, going from emptying, going to wondering, just doing the next right thing you know to do. And God steps in and kind of links it up to something that they could have never imagined. And so verse 3, or chapter 3, moves into this next phase of the story where basically Naomi instructs Ruth, hey, go to Boaz and let him know that you're interested in him being your kinsman redeemer. So we're going to read here a section where a lot of cultural practices here to unpack, but basically I want you to think of it much like a marriage proposal today. Much like a man getting down on one knee is kind of here what Ruth is doing with Boaz. Chapter 3, verse 7. When Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile. Ruth approached him quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. In the middle of the night, something startled the man, and he turned and discovered a woman lying at his feet. Who are you? He asked. I'm your servant Ruth, she said. Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a kinsman redeemer. See, that's the key phrase right there. The Lord bless you, my daughter, he said. This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. Look at this sentence. And all my fellow townsmen know that you are a woman of noble character. Wow, how powerful. What does that tell you about Ruth's life and the example that she set when she got to Bethlehem? Just the way she went about herself, the way she carried herself day by day. Even though her mother-in-law was going through a tough stretch, even though she was going through an emptying season, even though she had way more questions than answers, she just did the next right thing she knew to do. She did it with the best effort she could. Great work ethic, selflessness, sacrifice, going to the fields day after day, working hard, taking care. Her reputation is growing. Which made me think, isn't it true perhaps in the emptying and wondering seasons of life? Those just don't shape you, but do they not reveal you? For sure they shape you, A big part of what's going on in some of your journeys is God working, forming, and shaping, yes. But I wonder if what's happening with Ruth here is a good window for all of us. When you hit the emptying stages, where it's Mara around every corner, where you hit the wondering, where it's just one question mark without an answer, filled with a space of uncertainty. I wonder if those are the seasons when we're revealed. Well, when the substance in here really comes to the surface as it's put on display, good or bad. Like it could be, right? Probably a mixed bag for all of us, like it's pressed to the surface. And Ruth now is this amazing woman of character. She basically offers a proposal to Boaz, the whole sheet with the feet and laying at his feet. All of that is just a way of saying, I would like you to receive me as my kinsman redeemer. And Boaz is so taken back, and her character, Ruth's just being Ruth since she got there, right? She's just showing up, providing for needs, selflessly serving, not chasing after young Israelite men. Obviously, Boaz probably a little bit older here. That's what the reference. Like, hey, you didn't go chase after a lot of other young guys that you probably could have gotten. And that just shows, again, about her character. So chapter 4 now, as we kind of bring this home in the storyline, here's how Boaz responds. Verse 13, chapter 4. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And he went to her, and the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The woman said to Naomi, Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a kinsman redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you. Circle renew and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you and is better, look at this line, is better to you than 7 sons has given him birth. Wow. How about that? So the reputation of Ruth, better care for Naomi than 7 sons could have provided. That's a tremendous compliment given to her and her character there. So here's the third word for the morning, right? So you got Ruth chapter 1, you've got this emptying stage where you've got Mara around every corner of your life, where it's just death and loss and subtraction and heartache. Emptying, emptying, emptying. Gives way to Ruth chapter 2, wondering, where you're just entered in this space of uncertainty where you're childless, you're homeless, you're jobless, you're in the middle of a famine, you can't figure out how you're just going to get to the next day. You're just wondering, you're filled with all these questions with very little response of an answer. You're just doing the next right thing you know to do, even if it's hour by hour. It eventually gives way to Ruth 3 and 4, which is filling. This is the filling stage, right? Ruth could have never imagined when she just said, I'm going to stick with you, Naomi, that this is where the story was going to unfold, right? Ruth 3 and 4 remind us that times of renewing and sustaining do come from the Lord, like it said in verse 15. And the filling seasons are times when Boaz enters the picture, kind of out of blue. Times when the pieces of the puzzle come together. Times when the hurt is being healed. Times when the darkness is being pushed back. Times when the goodness of God is like tangibly being experienced around the corners of your life. Times when Mara gives way to true